Good to come to you tonight from Valley Worship Assembly. A short talk with you tonight about how to handle pressure, and our third part and last part of the series is Get Organized. Before I get into that tonight, I want to tell you what's happening over the next 5 weeks. There is a Life Wealth Legacy seminar being offered, and you log on to Zoom, and it'll go for about 2 hours each evening, directed by one of our leaders. To become part of this Dave Ramsey course, you would log on to valleyworship.ca and sign in there or on our Facebook page. And by doing so, you will be part of the Life Wealth Legacy course, and it will be led by Jerry Greiner. So I encourage you to do that over the next 5 weeks. It's a different kind of challenge. I will not be doing a live feed on Wednesday night for those 5 weeks. And if you would like to take part, please make sure that you sign on our valleyworship.ca or on our Facebook page. And then, as I say, through Zoom, you will participate live. I want to share some things with you tonight about handling pressure, because we live in a pressure time, a stress-filled time, and many of us struggle with our day that we live through. And so I'm talking to you tonight about Get Organized. So the first part of this series was how to foster a sense of humor. If we don't have a sense of humor, we're not going to survive, and we certainly need to do that. Then I talked about rest last week, and this is Get Organized. Let me say a prayer, and we'll step right into it. Father, thank you that you have answers in the Bible for the stresses and the pressures that we carry today in our lives. I pray as I share some thoughts tonight that you would use these thoughts for whoever tunes in, and that they would be able to find help from the things that I'm going to share. I ask this in your name, amen. There was a delicatessen, and an art connoisseur happened to be walking past. And as he did, he noticed this mangy little kitten lapping up milk from a saucer. As he stepped close, much to his surprise, he realized that the saucer was a rare and precious piece of pottery. It was an amazing piece of pottery, and this cat was drinking milk out of it. So he sauntered into the store, and he offered $10 for the cat. "It's not for sale," responded the proprietor. "Look," said the collector, "that cat's dirty, it's mangy, it's undesirable, but I'm an eccentric guy. I like cats that way. I'll raise my offer to $20. "It's a deal," said the proprietor, and he pocketed the $20. "For that amount, I'm sure you won't mind throwing in the saucer," said the art connoisseur. "After all, the kitten seems happy drinking from it." And he looked to the proprietor of the store, and the proprietor shook his head and he said, "Nothing doing. That's my lucky saucer, and from that saucer this week, I've sold 34 cats. Now that guy was organized, and he had a plan. In Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 and 16, it says, "Live life with a due sense of responsibility, not as men who do not know the meaning and purpose of life, but as those who do. Make the best use of your time despite all the difficulties of these days." Proverbs 16:9, it says, "Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. A man's mind plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps." Both of those passages speak about organization. I find that there are a lot of expressions that we use when we're talking about time. "I'm out to kill a little time." "Time heals all wounds." "Oh, he has too much time on his hands." Most of the time we talk about having too little time. We're out of time. There are too few hours in the day. Where did the time go? Time waits for no man. We're always rushing from one thing to another, and there are never enough hours in the day to go around. Undoubtedly, one of the greatest pressures that we face in life is this whole area of time. Perhaps now you have too much time on your hands, while normally you have too little. Many people get really stressed out because there doesn't seem to be enough time to do everything that needs to be done. And I've heard that already from people who are teachers, who are trying to teach with live feeds to their students, but also looking after their own children, and then taking care of a household and a variety of other things. Too much on their plate. There was a minister who had run out of time to prepare for a sudden funeral that came up, and he went to his computer and he did a search and replace, and he had the computer put in the name of the newly deceased in an old sermon that he had used. The new name was Edna, and it replaced the previously deceased Mary. Everything went fine until he came to the Apostles' Creed when the minister confessed that Jesus was born of the Virgin Edna. You know, sometimes we get disorganized in the process of trying to be organized. Jerry White, who wrote Choosing Plan A in a Plan B World, said this. He said, "Time governs every facet of our meager existence. Night and day, rest and activity, weeks and months, summer and winter, years and decades, all mark the cycles of every life. We have restraints on us that are measured by time. We have set parameters that demand we complete our work on time. Deadlines press in, and often we feel stressed because we've run out of time." Author Rick Yon, in his book Finding Time, added to this thought when he commented this way. He said this, and I quote, "It may be a student writing an exam paper, a housewife talking on the phone when she cooks supper and watches her 2-year-old waddle across the floor with a special fragrance trailing behind, or a businessman working into the wee hours of the night. All express the same frustration. I need more time." There's some basic truths that apply to every one of us. The first truth is we all have the same amount of time, but we use it differently. Every person I've ever known has 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week. Some people live longer than others. Methuselah lived 969 years. Jesus only 33 on the earth, if you're taking 2 Bible characters, but Jesus accomplished much, and Methuselah was only noted for his length of life. The second basic truth about time that applies to all of us is when we use time, we choose one activity, but we exclude others. In Luke chapter 10, 38 to 40, we find 2 people using their time in completely different ways. Mary sits at the feet of Jesus, and she's listening to Jesus. She's spending time with him while Martha is in the kitchen, and she's cooking. And Mary is relaxed, but Martha is stressed to the nines. I can kind of sympathize with Martha. I'm not an experienced or great cook, so I always want help if I can get it. And she wanted the help of her sister, but her sister wasn't giving it to her. The truth is, we all have to choose the priorities of our time. In the process, we exclude some things that can't get done, and we choose other things that we choose to do. Mary chose what was better according to Jesus. We have to be wise in making choices for what's best in the use of our time. The third principle about time that applies to every person is doing anything well takes time. You know, our society is traveling at an ever-increasing pace, it seems. Everything is attempted to be done in less time. It might work for some things, but others need a reasonable allotment of time to get done. How would you like a surgeon doing surgery on you, trying to beat the record for the kind of surgery that he's doing? Can you picture it? Scalpel, slice, dig in, cut out, sew up, close up, done. I can just imagine. It would be chaos in that room doing surgery. Here's the thing. God isn't in a hurry. He's never been in a hurry. He isn't in a hurry to build your character. He isn't in a hurry to save the world. He isn't in a hurry to bring his judgment. To achieve his will takes time. And to do things well in our lives will definitely take time. And that's a principle about time that we have to remember. The fourth key principle about time that applies to every one of us is that some things don't get done due to a lack of interest in planning, not time. For some things, we lack interest in doing them, like tax guarantees that will be hearing me tonight that haven't done their tax return for 2 or 3 years. You might be someone who waits till the very last day to get yours in to what the government requires. Some things don't get done because of poor planning, and if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. We've all heard that expression. Many people don't have a budget that guides their spending. That's why you should listen to this series starting next week. They don't make lists of things that need to be done. They grocery shop without a list. When they get home, there's nothing to eat, they say. It's not that there's not enough time. There's simply not enough planning. They're not organized. So let's spend just a little bit of time talking about being organized. How does the Bible see organization? We're going to see how God talks about it and the principles he's given us. And there are 4 key principles that we'll look at, and we're going to review, and then we're going to take a peek at our Ephesians passage that I read at the beginning. To get organized, first of all, you need to summarize your purpose. Why are you here? Why did God put you on this earth? In his best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life, author Rick Warren begins by asking this question: why are you here? And then he tells us the purpose of your life is far greater than your personal fulfillment, your peace of mind, or even your happiness. It's far greater than your family, your career, or even your wildest dreams and ambitions. If you want to know why you were placed on this planet, you have to begin with God. You were born by his purpose and for his purpose. As Warren writes, we're told a number of things. First of all, we're planned for God's pleasure. God's the creator of all things. And everything we do is to be an act of worship to God for his pleasure. Secondly, he tells us that we were formed for God's family. We all have families that we love, but we were formed particularly for God's family. We belong in the family of God, a community where we live out his principles in relationship with others. To become part of that family, we have to invite the Savior, Jesus Christ, into our lives, who helps us to become part of that family and live that family life. Thirdly, he says we were created to become like Jesus Christ. And Jesus is our model. If we keep focusing on him, we'll grow spiritually to look like him eventually. Fourthly, we were shaped for serving God. Through lives of service, God's glorified, and we affect others in a positive way through the ministries and the opportunities that God gives us. Do something good for a neighbor or a friend, and I can guarantee they'll be grateful. And number 5, we were made for a mission. And that mission is to reach those around us with God's message of love and to bring people into a relationship with God. God wants each of us to understand and to fulfill our purpose. Your purpose will be different than mine. He wants us to know specifically what our life should be all about. Jesus knew his purpose. On several occasions, we hear him say, as we read the Bible, "I have come." And then he tells us why. He says, "I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Another time he said, "I have come not to judge the world, but to save it." And once again he said, "I have come, a light unto the world." Everything that Jesus did while he lived his life in his 33 years was wrapped up in his understanding of his purpose. And the great dreams and visions and faith and ambitions that we all need to be working with are needing to be wrapped up in that understanding. What has God called you to do? What motivates you more than anything else in this world? That's your heart. How do your gifts and abilities relate to your heart and passion? Does your personality lend itself to accomplishing that purpose? You see, if you want to be organized, to begin with, you have to know your purpose. You're not a square peg in a round hole. There is a reason why you're here. There's a reason why you exist. Summarize your purpose. Secondly, you need to set goals. How do you go about reaching your purpose? Well, you attain it by setting goals that are definitive, goals that you can actually understand and achieve. Joshua was the leader of Israel after Moses, and Joshua had learned leadership at Moses' side. The great task that Joshua had was to lead Israel, and he had to decide the strategy to pick up where Moses left off. He needed to establish cities, and a lot of expectations rested on him as the leader of Israel. Joshua had the goal of bringing the nation he led into the land that God had promised them, we're told in Joshua 1 and 2. He had the goal of obeying the laws of God. And in Joshua 1, 7 to 8, God had told him, quote, "Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." Do you want to be successful? It begins with obeying the laws of God. And Joshua knew that. Joshua also had the goal of being a strong and courageous leader. We read that in chapter 1, verses 6, 7, and 9. And then he had the goal of maintaining the ethnic purity of his people, according to Joshua 23, 12, and 13. In other words, Israelites were not to intermarry with other cultures. And then he had the goal of dividing the land among the tribes of Israel, chapter 13, 8 to 21 and verse 45. He had all of these goals placed upon him that he had to place into a strategy for his life. And all the goals helped Joshua achieve his purpose to be a godly leader who would help his nation to become established in a new land. There are others in the Bible we could point to who had goals. Joseph dreamed of being in a position of authority, literal dreams that he had in the nighttime, in which his brothers would bow down to him. It wasn't a goal that he had to be worshipped, but it was his goal to be used of God to help his family and his nation. And so eventually, years later, God put him in the position of the prime minister of Egypt, and his dreams came into reality. David wanted to build a temple for God. It was a goal. And though he never built it, he gathered resources for it, and ultimately his son Solomon built it after him. Nehemiah had a goal of taking those in exile who had been taken out of exile by the Babylonians and bringing them back to the land of Israel, and then of rebuilding walls around Jerusalem to fortify the city. These were goals that Nehemiah had. Goals do several things in your life and my life, as they did in Joshua and Joseph and David and Nehemiah's lives. First of all, they motivate us to action and set a target for us to shoot to. If you don't have that target to shoot towards, you won't accomplish the things that you should. So in your strategizing, you need to have these goals, plans of action, things to shoot for. Secondly, they help us to make decisions by keeping focused on what matters. If you're heading towards your goal, you won't get sidetracked as easily. Thirdly, they protect us from the tyranny of the urgent. Things come in my life as they do in yours that are absolutely urgent, that move us off of the path of the direction that we're supposed to be going. They protect us from the tyranny of the urgent when we have goals. And then fourthly, they help us to measure our progress. If I have 5 goals, have I accomplished any one of them? Am I heading towards any one of them? And fifthly, they help us to control the stress of life. Dr. E.M. Gurman, an authority on stress, said, and I quote, "Stress is closely linked to the achievement of goals. One of the key ways of reducing time stress is to pay more attention to accomplishments than to the time involved." You need to set goals. You form a strategy. As part of that strategy, you set goals. And then you need to establish priorities. That's number 3. When we set priorities, we do 2 things. We decide which of our goals are most important and which are trivial or less important. And secondly, we decide which goals bring the greatest benefits and results. In the book of Joshua, we mostly read the history of the Jews taking the promised land on their own. This was on the top goal that they had and the priority for the nation. More than anything else, they needed to have a homeland. While Joshua obeyed God's laws personally, he knew that he'd best be able to lead his nation to obey them if they were settled in their own land. And so Joshua proved his strength of leadership and his courage by going to battle with his army against those in the land from whom he planned to take the land. And to keep his nation ethnically pure, he'd have to conquer the land and drive out the idolatrous inhabitants. And finally, Joshua realized that each tribe could only have their own territory once all the tribes have been able to claim possession of land in Canaan. In the same way, as you look at your goals and begin to organize yourself around them, you'll see which goals are most important or need to be accomplished before others can be. Sometimes one goal leads to another one being accomplished, but you have to do the first one before the second one can be reached. Write down your purpose, write down your goals. You need to establish priorities. Fourthly, you need to strategize to come up with planning. If you're stressed out because of time and you can't keep up with all the things that seem to be upon you, follow this process. Strategize to come up with a plan. As I said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. There was a true story that came out of a state mental hospital in the U.S. in Illinois a few years ago. An inmate escaped. He ran out of the hospital and down the road as fast as his legs would carry him. An orderly chased him, caught up with him, and brought him back to the hospital. The next day, another inmate or patient did the very same thing with the same result. For 10 consecutive days with 10 different residents or inmates, the same attempt to escape occurred and always had the same result. Each one was brought back. Now just think, if all 10 had been able to plan together and had gone running at the same time, likely most of them would have escaped successfully. The truth of the matter is, plans help us to succeed. You can set some great goals and you can prioritize them. You can make them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but until you formulate a plan for making them happen, you won't achieve the goals. It's not spiritual to fly by the seat of your pants. God can help you formulate a plan to meet your priorities and achieve your goals. Joshua strategized a plan for action. First of all, he delegated authority. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 10, it says that he had officers of the people speak to the masses to give instructions. He didn't try to do it all by himself. No, he had his officers do it. He delegated authority. Perhaps there's some things that you need to accomplish, but you need to accomplish through others if you delegate the authority to them to do those things. Secondly, he directed specifics. Joshua had the officers instruct the people when they'd be crossing the Jordan River. It would happen in 3 days, and he passed on information about preparing supplies for the traveling that they would do. He directed specifics. He told them all specific things that were all necessary for all people. Thirdly, he demanded assistance. As Israel was entering the promised land, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh were staying on the east side of the Jordan River, where they'd make their own homeland. But Joshua required that they could not set up houses and could not set up farms. They could not do anything on their land until they went along with the rest of Israel to take possession of the plots of land that every tribe would eventually have. He demanded assistance. There are people around you that can assist you. People who have skills, benefits, and all kinds of ideas, creativity that you don't have perhaps, and you need to demand assistance. Ask for assistance to achieve your plan of action. And then I noticed, fourthly, he dispatched agents. Joshua secretly sent out spies into Jericho, one of his first targets for takeover. He wanted to determine the city's strength and what the weaknesses of the city might be. And so he sent people out ahead of him to take a look around. There are people that can see things for your life, for your work, for your family that you can't see. If you ask for help, they will assist you, almost like spies, to give you information that you need to be successful. And then I noticed, fifthly, he delineated an order for takeover. Joshua determined the order of cities that would be taken over from their enemies. So he delegated authority, he directed specifics, he demanded assistance, he dispatched agents, and he delineated an order for takeover. Joshua put a plan together, laying out his purpose, his goals, and his priorities. And when we do that in our lives, we'll feel less stressed. You need to strategize to come up with a plan. Now, as I said, I'm going to jump back to Ephesians 5:15-16 again, which says, live life with a due sense of responsibility. That's being organized. Not as men who do not know the meaning and purpose of life, but as those who do. Make the best use of your time. Being organized, despite all the difficulties of the days. You might ask, why should I plan? Why should I take time to set goals, prioritize them, and strategize a plan? Well, let me give you just 4 reasons why. First of all, because it's a mark of wisdom. Verse 15 there said, be careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. I like what author Warren Wiersbe said. He said, a planned life can better deal with unexpected events. When the pilot does not know where he is heading, no wind is the right wind. So a mark of wisdom is the first reason why we need a plan. But secondly, because life is short. Verse 16 says, make the most of every opportunity. James 4:14 says, what is your life? You're a mist that appears just for a little while, then vanishes. And Psalm 103:15-16 says, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower in the field. The wind blows over and it is gone. You know, in life, we only have so many opportunities. The brevity of life is a strong argument for making the best use of our time and being organized. And then thirdly, we need to do so because the days are evil. What does that mean? Verse 16 says the days are evil. Without plans, we're easily sidetracked. And there are a lot of things that can allure us away from the values that we hold and the things we consider precious. Without a plan, temptations can distract us from achieving what the purpose of our life is really all about. The days are evil. And then fourthly, we need a plan because God created us with a mind. Verse 17 says, therefore, don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Understanding suggests that our minds have the capacity and the capability to discover God's will. His will is not a mystical experience that doesn't require clear thinking. God has a will and a plan for our lives that he wants each of us to know. We have to think it through clearly. He wants us to use our minds to gather the facts about how he created us and why, and to weigh them and to plan accordingly and to be organized. A lot of stress occurs due to time pressures. You might feel overwhelmed because you simply haven't been able to get everything done, and you feel overoccupied every day of your life. You feel like you don't spend time with your kids or keeping up, taking care of the house. Sometimes your job is not as successful as it should be. If you are organized, you won't waste time and you won't get distracted by the lesser things of life. Get organized. Some things to do, summarize your purpose. Know why you are here. And then set goals to achieve your purpose. From those goals, establish priorities and then strategize a plan. Proverbs 16:3 and 9 say, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Father, I pray for those who might be stressed because of time. It might be that they can't accomplish all the things they're hoping to. It might be that they feel every day that there aren't enough hours in the day. I pray they think through, simply and easily, the simple thoughts that I've shared tonight, that they're all biblical, they're all found in the lives of great leaders in the Bible. And Father, I pray that if they put these things into practice, I pray that they would turn around their time and have ample time for all the things they want in life, and that they would be able to achieve their purpose as they